It was summer 1997. I was playing Starfire 64 in what we like to call our archival room. It was just so happened to be the only room with the only capable CRT TV that could hook up to the N64. Meanwhile, most of my family was either in the kitchen or hanging out in the backyard playing with the dog and such. I was full force in trying to defeat the asteroid belt boss. Being only 6 at the time meant that I didn't have the hand-eye coordination or the gaming know-how I do now, so he proved a little bit of a challenge. I dodged left, I zigzagged right, fired my lasers and got a few hits in before he zapped me with a seizure-inducing light ray. I barrel rolled out of the way, but not before I got winged, downed my health to the tiniest sliver. The tension was palpable as I shot down most of his bogeys and shot his health down as well. Finally, I charged up a bomb and sent it his way, ultimately defeating him. I felt a wave of satisfaction the game could only give me as I caught my breath and took in the victory. My older brother rushed in. "Did you feel that?" he asks. "Feel what?" I responded as I made my way to the rest of the house. As the living room chandelier swayed back and forth, I saw the rest of my family in the backyard, looking around frantically. Yep, that part I said about how it felt like the whole room was moving with me during the boss battle, it actually happened. Turned out I was gaming right in the middle of a fucking earthquake and felt like just another part of the game. This is why I love visual mediums so much. That sense of immersion provides escapism when you most want it or even need it. It's why I miss the movie theater so much right now. All of my problems would be checked in at the door, and the only thing that mattered as soon as I took my seat was the film and what world it was going to try to transport me to. And if it did the job right, I was there. And the surrounding elements like the other rows of seats or the padded walls or the vents up on the ceiling no longer existed. Same thing with playing video games. If I'm sucked into the world I've invested hours into, I forget that there is a large mic stand right next to the TV or that I have a seriously bad cable management problem at my feet. However, games have an arguably stronger responsibility than film or television to deliver immersion, since this is the most interactive medium out of the whole lot. It's the only format out of all these listed that makes you an active participant of the medium. A movie keeps playing when you walk away. When you're in the theater, you can never really hit pause, it keeps playing. A game doesn't. A game doesn't progress unless you do. Immersion is just one element in the chemistry of hooking the player to the point of finishing the game, and it falls on the illusion that those writers and programmers and artists and hundreds of other people that developed the game have made for you. Because they too wanted to escape, they wanted to immerse themselves in this world, and that's why they live and create for the medium of video games. So what the fuck happened to Cyberpunk 2077? Why did this game draw so much backlash, so much disdain, skepticism, and ire from gamers, streamers, critics, and enthusiasts alike? Why did everyone set this game as the prime example of how not to release a game? What sets Cyberpunk 2077 apart from other buggy releases in the past? And how did CD Projekt Red's controversial behemoth prove why immersion is everything in a video game? First things first, Cyberpunk 2077 was developed as an RPG. When it's not representing a bombastic weapon of war, RPG stands for role-playing game, a genre that's even transcending video games and traces back to a time where pen and paper were the tools needed to transport you to worlds of your imagination with titles like Dungeons & Dragons. It was a game where you played a role and inhabited that role with characteristics, traits, and personalities. Video games were able to take these principles and spice them up with graphics, voice work, and above all, gameplay, and push that technology into newfound territories and sell a few million copies along the way. However, the core of it all remains the same. Most RPGs have you playing a character, mostly of your choosing. You pick the race, the gender, the look, the personality, skills, and abilities that are tailored to you and you alone. To make things more personal, most RPGs have branching storylines, often founded upon your decisions and the choices you made with each character you interacted with, thus fulfilling your role in the world and the plot that's unfolding before you. Very similar to that of Dungeons & Dragons in the past. So why the unnecessary history lesson here? Because I believe RPGs rely on that immersion most out of almost any other video game genre. Think about it. Sport and racing games, action games, horror, adventure. Sure, they demand a sense of immersion, but to an extent that with the remainder of that interactivity that the player has with those other genres is therefore fulfilled by either skill or precision or narrative. There's often cases where a certain game may not have had the best sense of immersion, but it has a very good gameplay loop that hooks the player into wanting to sink into more hours with that. And while technology has allowed us to immerse ourselves in the landscape of gaming even more than ever before with virtual reality, the layers of role fulfillment can only go so far in that format. I mean, it's mostly tailored to either experiences or to the actual technical gameplay. When it comes to actual role-playing games, we have to look upon the echelon of great and memorable RPGs such as Fallout New Vegas, Skyrim, and even our friends from the East with JRPG staples such as the Persona and Tales of franchises. And then we have a little game called The Witcher 3, one of the most acclaimed RPGs, let alone video games, period, in the past decade, from a little company called CD Projekt Red. Shortly after the release of the last piece of DLC for Witcher 3, Blood and Wine, CDPR put 50 employees into pre-production of Cyberpunk 2077 in 2016, roughly about 4 years after the game had been announced with that pre-rendered CG cutscene. Using the tabletop game as the source of material and its creator Mike Pondsmith as consultant, the game racked up close to $313 million to produce, making it the most expensive game ever made at the time. Yeah, that paid off well, right? Development then proceeded as normal, but one curious factor in all of this was CD Projekt Red's partnerships that came along the way. Nvidia, Q-Lock, Digitalscapes, Jolly, Research, and publishing titan WB Games, to name a few. They were all in after CDPR became the most valuable game company, at least that's what it was dubbed by most outlets, after the success of the Witcher games and the upcoming Witcher Netflix TV series starring Henry Cavill. Gameplay and development updates were underway at gaming conventions, Keanu Reeves joined the project with his breathtaking presence, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Then the COVID happened, and not only was the world not the same, but the gaming industry as a whole had to resort to working from home structures. CDPR was one of those companies that had to enforce this new system, and this brought about the first delay for the game from April to September 2020. This was met mostly positive by fans, until the second delay happened, and then the third, giving the title a final release date of December 10th, 2020. And this was a curious date, considering that by this point an awful lot of outlets and websites and influencers have already made their top 10 lists and Game of the Year nominations for that year. From an optical standpoint, what could be the reasoning behind this? Around this point, news of the studio enforcing crunch tactics on the development team started to wreak a staunch atmosphere, mainly after CDPR promised it wouldn't do so in the years leading up to the game's release, with the famous, quote, "when it's ready," end quote, flash screen at the end of one of their showcases making the rounds on the internet. Nevertheless, the game met the whimpering December release date. But at what cost?
Everything.
I wanted to add a brief breaking down of the history of CD Projekt Red's development of the game in an effort to theorize what the root of the problem was. The overall consensus is that it was in fact those partnerships, those investors that CD Projekt Red kind of lured in with their popularity that may have enforced and pushed for that December 10th release date when it was clearly wasn't ready. And since then, the concept of immersion within the game has been split, with some reviewers I've watched on YouTube videos and the like saying it's the most immersive and enthralling experience they've played in years, while others claim that the illusion of Night City was ruined for them because of the constant stream of bugs, glitches, and crashes they had to deal with. On top of that, there's no real way to disregard the notion that behind some of these reviews and some of these opinions is the platform of choice that they play the game on. Most praisers of the game played it with a very powerful PC rig, the platform CD Projekt Red even admitted Cyberpunk was built for. Meanwhile, console gamers with the base PS4 and Xbox One, the platforms that the game was mostly advertised for prior to the newest generation of consoles dropping, had much more devastating results, even resulting in a 4 out of 10 rating from IGN. Take that how you will, considering the stigma and reputation around IGN, but that speaks volumes. Amidst all of these accounts, there's also my experience with Cyberpunk 2077. Now beware, I'm going to lightly divulge into the ending that I got for my first run with the game, and though I won't discuss it in full detail, some of the gameplay footage you may see here might contain some spoilers for that ending, so be warned. But keep in mind, however, that this may not be the ending you receive while playing the game, because it all depends on your playstyle. Now let's analyze that term for the sake of this essay, playstyle. It's one of the biggest things I was looking forward to Cyberpunk 2077, because frankly, it's one of, if not the biggest thing I'm looking forward to with any RPG. It's figuring out how I'm going to play the game. Am I going to be stealthy? Am I going to wreak havoc out in the open? A mixture of both. Who am I romancing? Who am I going to swindle and betray? It's exciting to leave possibilities to the imagination with these kinds of games, and Cyberpunk ended up being no exception. I played this on the Xbox Series X after the limited edition Cyberpunk 2077 Xbox One console I ended up getting came with a digital copy. Though I may not be hitting the same benchmarks that a very highly powered PC could, the Series X was capable of running the game efficiently. I chose to run the game in quality mode, locking the frame rate at 30 frames per second, but with the fully realized textures and lighting effects I wanted. I logged in a total of 75 hours into the game, and there were occasional superficial bugs. The most pervasive were a floating phone or cigarette here and there. One of my favorites was actually seeing an NPC be duplicated within the environment, the latter of which even happened twice in one occasion, and this could be due to a glitch in the live streaming engine CDPR created for this game, in which assets are being generated as you traverse Night City and never at the same time. Supposedly. It was only around the 50-hour mark that I was doing a race with one of the more captivating side characters, Claire, that the game finally gave me my first crash. But I was rather lenient on the whole ordeal. I was genuinely surprised it took this long to get a crash in the game, period, and the power of the Series X's quick resume feature had me back into the action in under a minute. Up until this point, Cyberpunk 2077 was scratching all the right itches I expected an RPG to be. I was checking off side quest after side quest, organizing and prioritizing what kind of protagonist I wanted to be, and stitching the story and the world around my moral and dialogue choices. Shad himself said it after beating the game in one of his streams, quote, "They let the player be the lead. The length of the game is however long you want to play," end quote. And it's true, this was the definitive water cooler game for me and my buddy Greg, aka Surface Assassin, from my Twitch community. We would constantly compare not only where we were in the story, but also what choices we made, which perks did we go with, how did we approach a certain situation, etc, etc. That's one goal CDPR was able to achieve, is making sure that not any two players' Vs were going to be alike outside of appearance and customization. Greg's narrative was his narrative, as mine was mine, and for those first 70 hours, taking or not taking a mission played into the immersion that Cyberpunk was generating. By letting you choose how immersed you wanted to be, in and of itself created immersion. I know I'm going a little Christopher Nolan on you here, but just ponder it for a bit, or better yet, wait to play the game when it's in its finished form, and you'll see what I mean. Wait, David, what do you mean when it's in its finished form? That's why approximately about 30 to 45 seconds ago I said for the first 70 hours I was immersed, despite the fact that I completely stated I logged in 75 hours. Because it wasn't until I got to the point of no return finale that I managed to see exactly what everybody that was playing this game on that quote-unquote last-gen based console was talking about. To this day, I can't put my finger on it as to why, out of all the glitches and the bugs and mishaps that occurred to me while playing this game, this is what finally broke immersion for me. During those last 5 hours or so, you are given lengthy missions catering to your main storyline, culminating in a point of no return climax where you're not allowed to explore any other part of the city or venture through any of the other missions until you finish the plot, you finish the main story, and you get your ending. Pretty standard fare for most RPGs, let alone games as a whole. However, during a very action-heavy segment of the final mission, I noticed that subtitles for Keanu Reeves' character Johnny Silverhand appeared at the bottom of the screen. That's strange because I didn't really hear Johnny Silverhand at all. I looked everywhere to see if he was doing some kind of monologue, or maybe he was hanging out in the background, Joker from Arkham Knight style. But no, he was nowhere to be seen, and yet subtitled lines of dialogue continued to appear at the bottom of my screen. Not just for him, but even for one other character as well, with no vocals to accompany it. This fucking sucked, and this broke my immersion with the game wholeheartedly because I'm very passionate about storytelling mediums, if you couldn't already tell, in general, not just for games, but films and the like. And the way Cyberpunk was able to make me care about this cast of characters, and how it made me emotionally and dynamically hooked on the missions, that I was not given access to was the stuff that I was looking forward to for an immersive experience. So when the most emotionally reliant portion of the game, the goddamn ending, had missing pieces of dialogue that are important to these characters' developments and integral to delivering an emotional weight and narrative nuance, then I'm no longer V. Johnny's no longer on my shoulder as either an angel or a demon. I didn't leave my mark on Night City. I'm just a dude playing a game where I made my character look like Jared Leto's Joker, and now I'm just trying to finish it so I can move on to the next game. And that's not even accounting for my second most immersion-breaking element of the game, which I don't think even was technically a bug. It was just a mishap or an overlook on the developer's part: the mixing of the actual dialogue. Do you know how many double takes I made whenever a city socialite talked to me like a raging lunatic, but a homeless person on the side of the road is making sure that I'm the one that's not on drugs or mentally unstable? These are simply just two issues that dampen the illusion of a lived-in world for me. Just imagine what the millions of other players, both who shared their experience on the web or who didn't really chronicle it, dealt with these kind of things on a day-to-day basis, or frankly whenever they booted up the game on those base consoles. I feel to an extent blessed that I got to play this on the Series X, but what about everybody else who had poor luck in finding a next generation console? This is the lingering question that was warranting the wave of misfortune that CDPR ever since the game's release received. Constant patch notes, refunds, lawsuits, and the worst of the bunch, loss of goodwill from both players and would-be players alike. However, there is hope. What was that game everybody loves now and prefers it over the mainline games? Oh yeah, Fallout New Vegas. Gamers are constantly replaying it to see what choices they can make differently or what kind of undiscovered areas of the wasteland they can unearth. Remember how buggy and clunky that thing was at launch? What about that game that's practically been released on everything down to even your kitchen toaster? Of course, I'm talking about Skyrim. This game had some of the most notorious glitches known to gamerkind, and yet streamers and memers have revered it to no end. And of course, we can't overlook one of the greatest comeback stories in game development to this date, No Man's Sky. And with that game's turnaround, people were actually looking forward to the developer's next title, The Last Campfire. So goodwill and customer loyalty can be rejuvenated, reputations can be restored, and a game seemingly dead on arrival can be resurrected from the grave. History has shown us time after time. But on that other side of the coin, how many times is that coin going to repeat disastrous results like that of the release for Cyberpunk 2077 before investors and publishers finally learn? Could Cyberpunk 2077's case be the tipping point? Various content creators, streamers, and influencers are already coining the term cyberpunking for when a game hilariously glitches out, myself included. Is this going to be the cautionary tale that other developers and publishers are going to look into while making their games? There's varying degrees of uncertainty, not just with those cases, but also with Cyberpunk 2077 itself. CD Projekt Red has instilled a roadmap for 2021 to get the game up to the standard they expected, with the anticipated next-gen upgrade for PS5 and Series X coming in the latter half of this year. For now, patches among patches are being released to fix existing bugs and even new ones that arise from those patches. It's a frustrating situation that nobody's proud of and nobody envies. But there's one thing that can be done, or rather not done. Don't fault the developers. I'm not talking about the investors or the publishers or the higher-ups that wanted this thing to be taken out of the oven before it was ready. I've got my own words for them. I'm talking about the people that took a breath, lifted their head, puffed out their chest, and went to work despite the crunch culture because they sincerely love video games. They love what the medium does for the player and genuinely love creating them. There's no way I'm going to pretend to be able to speak for all of them, but there's a sufficient chance that they love creating games because, once upon a time, they too found themselves immersed in a world they couldn't turn off, or disconnect from, or put down. Maybe it was a classic N64 game, or a tabletop RPG deep into its third act, or maybe it was one of Sapkowski's Witcher novels. When it comes to storytelling mediums, immersion may be everything, but it may not have to be found in everything, and though it can be broken, it's never lost, and it can be found again. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to drop a like if you guys liked the video, or a dislike if you didn't. If you guys want to show your support, be sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications. If you guys want to support even further, check out the Patreon link in the description below. And also, Cyberpunk 2077 happened to be one of the games I streamed when it came out, so if you guys want to check out the Twitch and Facebook gaming links can also be found in the description below. As always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next one.